So if I were to come with you and offer you free housing and free food for the rest of your life, it might sound quite exciting, right? Especially considering the real estate and vegetable prices today. But then if I told you that actually this place, its address is in Tihar jail, then probably you're not as excited anymore. There's something about our prisons that instantly conjures up an image of fear and aversion in our minds, and we don't really want to talk about it. In fact, in ancient Rome, criminals were relegated to underground sewers as if to equate them with human waste and banish them out of sight and out of mind. But this was only a temporary stop before they were brought out for the real punishment, which was torture, flogging to death, stoning. The philosophy here was revenge as a means of punishment. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This was actually set down in the very first legal codes of Hammurabi in Babylon. And unfortunately, the philosopher Socrates was subject to this manner of punishment. Death by poison, because he was apparently poisoning the minds of the youth. But then humans thought a little bit and we decided that, we don't have to be so cruel in dealing out our punishment. Instead, we can just incarcerate people, and that itself will be enough punishment. So then we came up with our first prison in our castles and fortresses. And in popular culture, we know about Kalapani on Andaman Islands, which is where our freedom fighters were sent off. Kalapani is a really good example of a really bad jail, or a really good jail if you're a British officer. Here, there's a central guard tower that's telling you that you are being watched at all times, but you can't see who's watching you. Like a lot of colonial architecture at the time, the message going out was one of power, telling you that, when you cross this gate, you are completely now set out from society and you're powerless henceforth. And inside, it's an empty, barren, stark place, unending, dark, and dingy. And of course, if you're a prisoner, you don't deserve any privacy. So over a century since we had these kind of prisons, have our prisons really changed all that much to be better? And do they need to be? Because if we make our prisons really bad places, then probably it will prevent people from committing crime, right? Well, I'm gonna change tracks a little bit here and talk about something that might be a little bit familiar for you guys. A lot of you might have seen a TED talk by Amy Cuddy, in which she talks about how our bodies and our minds are powerfully connected. She talks about how if you're kind of hunched over all day and you typically walk like that, then your stress levels are really gonna shoot up. She says you can literally change your lives if you just change your body posture. Now imagine for a moment that you're a prisoner in a barrack that's meant for 20 people to live in, but actually has about 30 or 40 people. And every day, your existence is day in and day out. You are just kind of hunched over, clinging on to that little shred of personal space that you've been given. By this logic, you're quite likely to end up a very, very stressed individual, right? Especially if you're a mother with child, as a lot of women prisoners actually are. Our bodies and our minds, they're powerfully connected, and our body affects our mind affects our behavior affects our outcomes, and our outcomes together affect society. But why is this important? It's important because factually, a very small fraction of prisoners are actually going to be in there for life. In fact, in Gujarat, 96% of prisoners are going to be back in our society and back in our neighborhood. doesn't this mean that maybe we need to start looking at prisons and the purpose of prisons in a different light? Maybe not as places that dish out punishment, but something else. Shouldn't the minimum criterion of a prison be that an inmate emerges no worse than when he entered? But is this happening? Because if you look at the United States, as high as 70 to 80% of criminals are actually returning to a life of crime after discharge from prison. Prisons are, in fact, becoming breeding grounds for hardened criminals. If we want society to be a safer place, then we really have to stop this vicious cycle where we're putting people in jail and then turning them back in society as even more hardened criminals. You know, chicken like this, they're just gonna end up on your dinner table, but human beings kept in conditions like this, they're gonna end up back in society. Our bodies and our minds are powerfully connected with the environment around us, and we really underestimate the role that architecture and the environment plays. What we design, in turn, acts back on us and designs us. And Marie Willis, she talks about how there's a circularity between all the things that you design and put outside and what happens within us. There's a connection between what's without and what's within. And recent research in neuroscience is actually indicating this. It's indicating that if you look at contemplative buildings like this, you're physically actually induced into a state of mind that's similar to being in meditation physically. Well, it's understandable that most architects would rather kind of think about places like this and aspire to do work like this and not have to think about places like prisons, which are doing a lot of harm to people. But for my thesis, I asked this question: can prison architecture change to enable reformation instead of punishment? And this question is being asked today by a lot of people around the world as well. This is a new prison in Australia. And if you notice, it's completely different from the previous pictures we saw, right? The scales of the buildings are much, much more relatable to us. The building is opening up to the landscape, to gardens. The forms are almost playful, and there's color, and there's more view to the outside. Nature, long-standing research has proved that nature actually has therapeutic effects on us, on our body and mind. Kathleen McFerrin, there was a TEDx conference at a prison in which she spoke about how when she would visit the prisons, there was this one particular prisoner she saw every day coming in and out of the courtyard and planting these flowering shrubs under the razor wires. And so very curiously, she asked him one day, why do you keep coming and doing this even when people remove it? And his answer was, I just want to bring some beauty into this place. D.H. Lawrence had said that it was ugliness which really betrayed the spirit of man in the 19th century. That the human soul needs actual beauty even more than bread. And I think that this is what some of the newer prisons are trying to do. Of course, I'm not saying that we should start making 5-star hotels at taxpayers' expense. Even though if we did start doing that, probably there would be no taxpayers left on the outside. This is just about restoring basic human dignity, which in turn will reflect back in society when these people are out. This is about recognizing that our fundamental need as human beings is to have good, healthy human relationships. If you look at what's happening, the changing character of prisons today as compared to what they used to be, it's astonishing and it's really actually very exciting. The one on the left is a 19th century prison in the US. And the one on the right is that newer prison in Australia. What's happening is that the architecture is changing to mimic society, to mimic a village almost. It's opening up to the environment. It's breaking up into smaller groups. And unlike, the previous prisons where you were either one amongst several people fading into anonymity, or you were completely isolated. Unlike this, you have breaking up into smaller groups, and the smaller group, it mimics the family unit in outside society. The assumption here is that normal settings will generate more normal behavior. So you're part of a group, you're accountable to the group, and you're collectively accountable to the environment around you. And it creates a larger picture where you're part of something. And what also changes when this diagram changes is that you no longer have an invisible higher authority sitting on a guard tower just watching your every move, Instead, the community is monitoring itself. The community is watching out for itself, and the guard is very much a part of this relationship on ground, part of this equation. In Kerala, there's a prison without walls. Here, the authorities have dared to try what not many people have the guts to try, and it's commendable. And mind you, this jail houses murderers. And in 32 years of operation, this jail has had only one escape attempt and one repeat offender, writes Jim McKell. A prison without a wall is a place into which society can permeate and volunteer, and government funds are so poor that it's really up to us and volunteers to kind of educate and empower prisoners to be better individuals. So the more we can allow this kind of permeability, the better it is for everyone. So, I was inspired by this kind of readings that I had been doing. And so I was very optimistic when I started my research thesis, and I started acquiring permission to go and actually visit a jail, and tried for weeks unsuccessfully, and finally one day just got frustrated and told my friend, let's just go take a walk and see whatever we can see from outside. So being a very, very diligent student, I took out a giant printout of the satellite image of the jail, very smartly, and I'm carrying it like a map and taking a nice little stroll outside the terrorist cells. So obviously in no time, the authorities just flew down on us, apprehended us. They thought we were planning some escape attempt, and they took our mugshots and they uploaded us to the system, and they told me, you are forbidden from entering jail ever. I think I might be one of the only people who's kind of been given permission to do what they want. But what I learned from this incident is that things are not going to change suddenly and become utopian all of a sudden. We have to kind of accept existing systems. And Kerala jail is nice, but it's exceptional. Most jails are isolated systems, right? But we can take advantage of this isolation like Kiran Bedi did. In 1993, she did something unthinkable. She converted the jail into an ashram so that self-realization would trigger a process of transformation. She put 1,000 of the most hardened criminals in India in one of the worst jails in the country, the Tihar jail, to be in one hall for 10 days straight to practice the ancient meditation technique of Vipassana. And this was so successful that the methods now even reached prisons in the United States, and it's slowly, gradually doing something. So yes, India does have a lot of reformative programs in place. What we need to work more on is the intangibles, beauty, aesthetics, community, and nature. Presently, we're so reluctant to even revise our guidelines and our policies. We are reluctant to plant trees in our newer jails because we're afraid that if you plant a tree, then the inmate, he'll want to climb the tree because he'll want to fall down, because he'll want to break his leg, because he actually wants to land up in a hospital far away because, he's that desperate to get a lease of fresh air. That's the logic with which we operate. Um, we deny them basic sort of connection with the environment, which can actually develop a lot of sensibilities. Um, so we obstruct them. We don't allow this kind of connection. We instead obstruct their vision with these horrible vertical bars. And the manner in which we make our inmates connect to society, to their families and friends, who are their only kind of connection to outside society, their motivation for becoming better people. It's like me trying to have a conversation with you, and there's a cage between us, and there are 20 other people here also shouting at the same time, and we're trying to have this conversation. It's dehumanizing, it's undignified, and it's not helping anybody. We need to seriously look at our guidelines again and really acknowledge how much the environment shapes us, much more than we give it credit for. But how much does the environment of the prison really affect the rest of us on the outside? Well, we don't realize it, but historically and symbolically, the prison as a diagram has influenced our schools, our hospitals, our hostels, our old age homes, our offices, and even our housing societies. They're all about keeping people inside and controlling movement. One end of the spectrum, which is the prison, it does affect every other end of the spectrum. And everything is connected. So the decisions we make today here do affect everything else. There's a circularity. Think about the repercussions that are possible if we make changes at one end. Let me give you an overarching example. A lot of our speakers today have been talking about the environment and about climate change and the urgency of changes that we need to make. And we all know this at some level, and we're all quite frustrated at some level that things are happening really, really slowly. Because there's so many forces, there's so many systems in place in consumeristic society that are preventing these changes from really happening. But think about it, the prison is an isolated system. It's completely cut off from a lot of these forces and almost cut off from consumeristic society. Just think about the sheer number of prisons in the world and the sheer number of people in each of them. If each of these took advantage of their isolation to become crucibles for change, if each of these became sort of crucibles for technological, environmental, creative, and spiritual research, where could we go as a planet? Thank you.